The VVN Music interviews are brought to you by VVN Music. Get the latest news on the veteran artists of rock, pop, soul, country, folk, and blues at vvnmusic.com. And by audible.com. Now you can get a free book download from their library of over 180,000 titles by going to audibletrial.com/VVN. Hi, and welcome to episode 53 of the VVN Music Interviews. I'm Roger Wink, and today our guest is Dick Taylor. Dick's musical journey started with school friends Mick Jagger and Keith Richards and a group that they called the Rollin Stones, playing guitar and, after Brian Jones joined, the bass. But even before they recorded their first tracks, he returned to art school. The next year, Dick and Phil May formed the Pretty Things, a band that started out in a very similar R&B tradition like the Stones, but eventually transitioned to a more psychedelic sound. Their 1969 album, SF Sorrow, is considered by many to be the first true rock opera, predating Tommy by a couple of months. However, because of business problems, the album didn't make its U.S. debut until 6 months after the UK release and after Tommy gained popularity. Dick left the band in 1969 and spent time producing, most notably the debut album for the group Hawkwind. He returned to the Pretty Things in 1978 and has been a member ever since. The Pretty Things recently announced that they would be retiring from doing electric shows by the end of the year. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the Pretty Things and your impending retirement, at least from what I understand.
Impending doom, yes.
From the electric side of things. The way I read it was that you are retiring from playing live electric, but I'm assuming that means you're still going to be doing acoustic shows possibly in the future?
Yeah, definitely. Phil and myself will be doing some. And yeah, that just about sums it up at the moment. Whether things will change, because we've been enjoying the electric stuff so much, and really it's all a question of Phil's health. I mean, that's what it's down to. It's nothing else but. And he finds intensive touring very difficult.
I was going to say, so you don't see there being one-off electric shows or anything, or is it just that the acoustic is just calmer and easier for him?
I'm sure our manager will go mad when I say this, but yes, of course I see us doing one-off electric shows. But I certainly hope so. I certainly will be doing as much as I can in whatever capacity that I find myself in. Let us see what the world brings us is more like it, really. It all depends largely on Phil's health, very much on his health.
For the acoustic shows, is it just you and Phil, or do you have a band for that also?
Well, we're thinking of a couple of options to kind of expand. We've done some shows using myself, Phil, and a guy called Sam Brothers. Not Sam's brother, as people, Sam Brothers. We've done a couple of guests with him, which worked out very well. We did used to do shows with myself, Phil, and Frank, but I don't think Frank's got much appetite for doing too many of them these days. But the one, as I say, Phil, myself, and Sam worked out very well. There's a couple of other options which we might do, and we shall see. Everything is really in the melting pot, but I mean it is definitely our intention to stop touring as such.
Your tour this year takes you through the UK and Europe. Are there any plans on coming to the US before you at least hang up this little bit of your career?
Well, there would be if someone would endeavour to ask us to do it. I know there's been a couple of inquiries. It's just putting enough gigs together to make any sense. Much like Japan, we did some gigs in Japan, but it's so difficult to do anything significant. Anything which basically the economics of going to Japan are quite difficult, and to a certain extent America as well, obviously. But if there were a few shows projected, I'm sure we could do it. I'd love to do it again. I miss going to America. We haven't been for quite a long while.
I'd like to go back to your early days. How did you come about to start playing guitar?
Very good point. I came from a family where everybody seemed to be playing a musical instrument, particularly my grandfather rather, who was very, very good on mandolin, and that was his big thing. He loved the mandolin and guitar and banjo and piano, violin. He had a kit of drums, which the only thing that I kind of inherited it from him, unfortunately. And I must say, I always felt like, oh God, I wish I could do this, and felt that I had very little musical talent. And rock and roll came along and skiffle, and I actually have always, at that time, I developed an interest in, when I was really quite young, an interest in jazz, but skiffle and rock and roll gave me the realization that you could actually put really, really good music together without being super trained and, technically wonderful. And I started playing. First of all, a friend of mine bought a plastic ukulele. I tried a few chords on that, messed about with my grandfather's mandolin again, and finished up getting a guitar for my birthday. And it was really rock and roll and skiffle. And then my sister was interested in folk music and blues. I heard Big Bill Bruns's acoustic records and was kind of hooked then. I'm trying to play blues guitar, and that's continued. That's about it, really. And when my friends and myself were listening to rock and roll, we kind of figured out quite easily that it was based on a lot of black music from, the sort of urban blues and rhythm and blues from those days, and started listening to those records. And from then on, that's how things developed.
And those friends included Mick Jagger and Keith Richards.
Initially Mick, because I was at school with Mick from the age of 11 till I was 16, and we were always in the same class, and we realised we had the same taste in music. And another friend of mine, a guy called Robert Beckwith, and myself and Mick, and would get together and start playing music together. And that went on actually even after I left the grammar school where I was, and Mick continued at that school. And then I went to art school, and at art school I met up with Keith when I was 16. Now, I think Keith was 1 year behind me, I'm not sure. But anyway, I got to know Keith, and there were a lot of people in the art school playing sort of folky music on guitars. And Keith was sort of trying to play Scotty Moore style. I think his favourite thing was All Right, I'm Left, She's Gone. I think it was that. And we play in the cloakroom. And he had a little sort of battered archtop guitar. And everybody else had sort of proper folky, round hole, dreadnoughty type guitars. I've been given a very nice guitar, which unfortunately went missing a few years ago, which was almost like a parlour guitar, and that was I really liked that. But anyway, so Keith and I would sit there and play music, play bluesy stuff together, and eventually he bumped into Mick and he'd known him when he was a really small kid. And of course, one of them was carrying the Chuck Berry record or whatever. And they met up, and then we thought, well, let's get him along to our rehearsals, and which happened mostly in my parents' the back room of my parents' house. And then we heard that a club was opening in a place called Ealing, West London, where Alexis Corner was playing rhythm and blues. So we went along, had a listen, and were suitably impressed. And then we met Brian Jones there, and Brian said, "Did Mick?" People used to get up on stage and do stuff. We heard Brian play with, I think it was either Long John Baldry. He definitely did stuff with Paul Jones, and Long John Baldry also used to go and just, sit in with Alexis Corner. And we were very impressed with his slide playing, particularly Brian's slide playing. And he invited Mick along to sing. Mick took Keith along. Half of Brian's band walked out, and he asked me if I would like to play bass. So we did. So then the sort of balance of the band, which I don't think at that point, I think it was called Brian Jones Band or something. And I remember being up in the pub in Soho where we rehearsed, and we were thinking of the name, and we just played Rollin Stones Blues, and hence that's where the name came from. Does that do for a brief explanation?
Yeah. Was it hard for you to? I assume you had no experience with the bass. Then you just, when you switched to it, you started to pick it up. Was
Not
it a
really.
hard transition?
No, I kind of worked out where the notes were on the bass. Well, the bass is like a guitar with two strings cut off it, in a way. Well, that's how I regarded it at the time. And of course, there's a lot of bass players who throw their hands up in horror at that and say, "Oh no, it's a total art of itself," of course, which it is, of course. And whether I was any good as a bass player, I don't know. I actually like playing bass now, I must say, when I've done it lately.
6 months after all this happened, I think it was around 6 months, you decided to go back
Well,
to art school. Did
I
you?
never left art school. I never left it, and I actually, what I did was Keith and I and Phil May were all in this art school called the Sidcup School of Art, and we were being trained for being commercial artists, in quotation mark. Well, yeah, that's what we were training to do, and doing lettering and all the sort of stuff which now, you sit down at your computer and do. And of course, there was no Photoshop, and someone had invented a thing called Letraset, where you stuck little letters on the mock-up of your ad, in various typefaces, and we were learning to do all that stuff. So there I was at art school. I was trying to go into the Royal College of Art, which is like one of the top arts colleges in London. Basically, if you go there, you're guaranteed that as long as you don't completely screw up, you're going to do okay. In actual fact, I never did go there. In the end, I went to the Central School of Art, and when I was studying to try and get to the Royal College of Art, I thought, well, I've got to make up my mind how much I concentrate on music, how much I concentrate on trying to get into the Royal College, and kind of also thought, well, bass, do I really want to play bass at that time? And I decided, well, because, it wasn't such a big thing sort of leaving a band, because everything was much more fluid. I mean, if you think of how many drummers the Rolling Stones had in their first couple of years, year of their existence, there were quite a few, wasn't there? So, it wasn't sort of such a big thing, because, people like Alexis Corner, his lineup would constantly change. And the idea of huge fame and fortune was obviously not top on our list of what we thought was going to happen. We played music as anybody with, like anybody, because we enjoyed it. And I think that's what still we do. Certainly I do. And I think that's why Keith and Mick, who could almost certainly stop right now, and I think they continue because that's what they do. It's like nothing. It's because they love playing. And I love playing as well. And anyway, back to the art school thing, and I decided anyway to stop playing with the Stones, and I was at school with Phil May, and when I went to the Central, Phil, before I went off to the Central, said, we should really start a band, and so we did, which was must have been in the summer of '63 that we started to rehearse. I went to the Central School, and there I met the guy who became Pretty Things' first manager, a guy called Brian Morrison. And anyway, we hired. I'm not quite sure of the timing of things, but I know I was over at the Central School. It might have been my last term of the Sidcup School of Art, and we hired the Rolling Stones for the dance at the Sidcup School of Art, and they got paid £25, and we thought, my God, we could be doing this. We could be making some money like this. And so anyway, and the Pretty Things started, and the Rolling Stones obviously started taking off, and we started doing the rounds of the art schools, all around London, and then we got spotted by someone and said, I think you could get a recording contract, and the Pretty Things got a recording contract with Fontana Records. And so that was basically the start of the Pretty Things.
You've said that you were playing a similar R&B to what the Rolling Stones were playing, but you were doing it a lot rawer, a lot
probably
grittier.
Because of our incompetence. I don't know. I think we didn't want to be like a sort of smooth imitation of American R&B. We wanted to kind of slightly, be. I think there was a desire to be quite raw, and get people dancing and what have you. It was kind of like a combination of doing what we knew we could do, and also wanting to draw a line between ourselves and particularly the Stones, because we didn't want to be sort of thought of as a sort of pale imitation of the Stones or what have you, which I don't think we were.
Outside of purely the music, you also were a group of fairly, shall we say, rambunctious guys. There was an infamous incident down in New Zealand where after you guys left, Parliament there discussed whether to ban all rock groups from coming in. What the heck did you guys do?
I didn't do much, but it was most of the stuff there was to do with Viv Prince, our drummer, who is still alive and is still not the most sober of people. And Viv at that time was really quite a wild character. And the thing which really sparked the most controversy was we already had advanced publicity, which sort of kind of spoke of us as being sort of wild and woolly. And then Viv was doing stuff like he's sitting out in the street and holding court and saying he was king of the world and things like this. It's very odd. But then we were at one, Viv, of course, did drink an enormous amount, but we were at a gig and there was a reporter there, and he said, and Viv, for one of the few times in his life, was drinking from a large bottle of water. And this reporter said, "Hey, what are you drinking, Viv?" And he said, "Oh, meth, as in methylated spirits, obviously, not methamphetamine." And he said, "Meth." And then the next day in the paper, pretty things drink meth before they go on stage. There was also a lot of horsing about, not just with us, but with all the bands on the tour, particularly the Australian band who were backing Sandy Shaw and Eden Kane, who were on our tour with us, which was an odd lineup, to say the least. And Viv a couple of times made, like, you know how you can roll up newspaper and make like a sort of like an aspidistra plant or whatever plant out of it. You just tear down the sides and fold it down. And he rushed on the stage brandishing one of these, not much in that, but the only thing was it was on fire. And I remember seeing the bucket of water be thrown over him and Viv looking up, and it was almost like the bucket of water sort of stopped in midair in my mind. And then the next thing, it of course descended on Viv, the burning thing, and his head and what have you. And the next thing we knew is Pretty Things tried to set fire to theatres.
So the news wasn't that much different in sensationalizing things back then as it is today.
Exactly.
It's all the same thing.
Precisely. It's exactly that. So in the end, we apparently got banned from ever going back to New Zealand again, which was pretty funny because about 5 years ago, we did exactly that. And we weren't thrown out on our ears. They did let us in, and we played again in Auckland.
As the 60s progressed, you moved from an R&B to a more of a psychedelic sound. Was that a natural progression, or was it forced by the times?
No, it was totally natural. In actual fact, in our case, what happened, what actually happened is our recording contract finished with Fontana, and we weren't totally happy there by the end. We were being produced by a guy called Steve Rollin, who desperately wanted us to make a commercial pop record, and we kind of resisted that to a certain extent. Anyway, our contract with Fontana came to an end, and all the while during our live shows, there was a lot of improvisation, a lot of lunacy musical lunacy on stage, and Viv would get off the drums and go around drumming on this, that, and the other, and we just do numbers which lasted a long time and went off into sort of quite odd places at times. But when our contract finished with Fontana, we went into a demo studio and did exactly what we wanted. And at that time, our lineup had changed as well. And we got guys, John Povey and Wally Waller, who and I think at that time we had either Skip or Twink, John Alder on drumming. And anyway, we made these demos, which were very psychedelic, and they actually reflected far more what we were doing at the time on stage, than the stuff when we've been recording with Fontana. And we were then looking around for a record contract, and it turned out in the end that we went with EMI. And Norman Smith, a guy who'd worked on the Beatles albums and Pink Floyd, became our producer. And because he really liked what he heard, we did one song which was Defect in Grey, if you're familiar with that, sort of like 4 songs in 3 minutes. Oh, it's actually about 6 minutes, I think. But it's anyway, certainly rather different from anything we did prior to that. And that's how the change happened. And it was definitely it wasn't us. It wasn't us reacting to any outside pressure. It was what we wanted to do.
In 1968, you went into Abbey Road Studio to record SF Sorrow. And at the same time, both Pink Floyd and the Beatles were both recording there. That must have been quite an interesting time to have so much talent hanging around in one facility.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Mind you, most of the conversations were sort of around the tea machine and things like that. But no, it was great because like we would sort of obviously bump into the Beatles, and we knew the Floyd pretty well anyway. And it's funny because like it seemed quite natural in those days to be, go to a club and there's Hendrix, and sort of in London giving again Hendrix a lift, and it didn't seem that sort of out of the ordinary to see these people who became so rock luminaries around on the London scene. And it was great. Obviously, it was amazing working in Abbey Road because it was such a sort of not only a wonderful studio, but somehow it seemed to be, such good stuff was coming out of it. And EMI, despite being a sort of rather sort of stuffy, old-fashioned company in lots of ways, gave so much artistic freedom to people. And also, I think they realised that, with the Beatles, that their bread was definitely buttered with allowing people freedom to do what they wanted, and the Floyd, obviously, they sold a mass at their first album. And so it was great because, you had budgetary constraints, definitely, which we broke continuously. But having said that, we managed to produce an album which I'm still proud of. And it took a long while. And Norman would get us in at sort of whenever we could get in the studio, at times when other people weren't, what have you.
At the time it was released, SF Sorrow wasn't recognized as the landmark album that it is now, and it didn't have as much commercial success, and especially in the United States, where it didn't get released for 6 months after it was released in the UK. Right. Which is just a shame that it didn't have the exposure that it really should have.
It's funny because it's funny how the whole there's so many albums which now we regard as seminal albums, like the Love albums, and like at the time we thought, oh wow, Forever Changes is such a wonderful album, it must be a huge hit. And of course they didn't sell that much, some of them. You look back on it and they're so important.
Yeah, sometimes looking at things in the past and looking at it in relation to everything that came after makes you realize how much of an influence something was within the grand scheme of rock history, but at the time it just wasn't realized, or in a lot of cases, just plain record company problems,
Yeah,
and it wasn't
exactly. It's
promoted in
like,
the way it should have
because
been.
you know that in actual fact, SSRI got released on the Tamla Motown Rare Earth label. You know, their sort of white rock label, and it was it wasn't a huge success. The label basically just wasn't the right place for us to be, and you know, obviously, I think Tamla did a few sort of offshoots, none of which really worked as well as their core artists.
I think the only group on Rare Earth that actually sold a lot of records, at least here in the U.S., was the actual group Rare Earth.
Yeah, I know they were on Rare Earth. Yeah, I never knew much about them, to be honest. But so they did all right.
But no, you're right. Most of the other artists, whether it was a lack of understanding on how you had to market it or whatever it was with the company, they just didn't do that well.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think there were other labels which would have served us better, I'm sure, in America.
You left the Pretty Things right after that for,
Yeah.
I think it was around 9 years. What did you work on during that time?
Well, first of all, I was doing record producing, and I recorded. I think the first people I recorded were Hawkwind, their first album, and I did another about 3 or 4 albums, and then eventually I started working with a jeans company, believe it or not, and I did that for ages, and I wasn't really playing very much, and then I started living in Wimbledon and getting friendly with some people who were musicians, and got persuaded to start playing again. And then I got asked if the Pretty Things would do, because the Pretty Things had their stint with Swan Song and everything, and with Peter Grant, and had kind of come to a bit of a hiatus in the end. And this guy contacted me from Holland and said, would I sort of reform the Pretty Things, or contact the other guys in the Pretty Things and do a gig in Holland? And so I contacted Phil, and he said, "Oh yeah, why don't we?" And it finished up with myself and Pete Tolson, who had been the guitarist for a lot of the time in Swan Song years, and Skip playing drums, and I think Wally playing bass at that time. Maybe it was someone that I can't remember. Yeah, it must have been Wally. We did this gig, and basically I've done every other gig since then.
I was going to say, you didn't look back from that point on.
No, I've done everything else which has happened with the Pretty Things. And there have been a couple of kind of incarnations. Phil started doing a thing in London, and it was a kind of loose sort of house band at a pub in Little Venice in London, and it finished up with getting a lot of guests in. Dave Gilmour used to drop in and play, and it finished up again becoming one incarnation of the Pretty Things. And then we started working in Holland, from Holland a lot. And yes, again, there was another version of the Pretty Things which sprung up there. And eventually, and we recorded we recorded an album called Crosstalk, which would have maybe have done better had Warner Brothers not had it not been released on exactly the same time that Warner Brothers got in a lot of trouble for bribing record companies, bribing record shops to get things hyped up the charts, and generally being very, very naughty about their marketing techniques. And also, when the album was released, and we read a review of it, and the review said the Pretty Things must have loved the first side of this album, because when I turned it over, it was the same on the other side. And they pressed the whole of a big batch of albums, which were the same on both sides. And as compensation, as an apology, unbelievably, they sent Phil a very large cheese. And anyway, so Crosstalk, although it is actually a really good album, didn't exactly didn't sell the millions which it deserved to. For lots of reasons, not to do with any of the quality of the music. And after we'd done Crosstalk, we met up with Mark St. John, who became our producer and manager, and we recorded quite a bit of stuff with him. Then continued to work with the Dutch band, the guys, it was a multinational band actually. And then eventually Mark said, it'd be a really good idea to get a kind of original band back into place. And we got basically the lineup which did S of Sorrow back together, and which went on for quite some time. And eventually, Skip, the drummer, Wally, the bass player, and John Povey, the keyboard player, all for different reasons couldn't really continue with us. And we then got George and Jagger, our current rhythm section. And so that's the lineup today, which we've had now for coming on to 11 or 12 years, I think.
And it's my understanding that you're in the studio on and off right now recording a new album?
Yes, we got quite a bit of it done in quite a short space of time, and then we've had a hiatus for various reasons, but we'll be completing it quite soon, I hope.
I know that you never really toured SF Sorrow as in playing in its entirety, because I think you said it was just too complex to really recreate live.
We did say that at the time, except we've now done it about 4 or 5 times, and we're going to be doing it again. So we're certainly doing it at least twice this year. So there's going to be a couple of SF Sorrow shows.
The new album, though, are you creating that with the fact that you will only be playing acoustically in mind, or are you? No,
this is most definitely not an acoustic album. We may do one. We may well do an acoustic album. We've talked about it. It might actually be a blues-orientated album, the acoustic one. But no, the album we're doing at the moment is hopefully kind of almost a continuation of what we were up to with the last album we did, Sweet Pretty Things Are in Bed Now, of course, album.
Well, listen, I really want to thank you for taking the time to talk to us. I mean, it's an absolutely fascinating story you have throughout your whole career.
Thank you. And, it's a pleasure to talk. I hope I haven't waffled on too much, but there you go.
The Pretty Things have dates across the UK and Europe throughout the rest of 2018. The VVN Music Interviews can be heard via Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, YouTube, Stitcher, Google Play, Libsyn, and the VVN Music website. For the latest news on the veteran artists of rock, pop, soul, country, folk, and blues, go to vvnmusic.com. If you have any comments or questions about the website or this podcast, please send them to vvnnetwork@gmail.com. The VVN Music Podcast is a production of the VVN Network, copyright 2018.